God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." Holy wisdom, holy word. Thanks be to God. Can you imagine the terror of a 3-mile-wide comet aimed directly at Earth? What about the comet then crashing into the ocean, let's say off the coast of Madagascar? Can you conceive the implications of such a thing? Superheated water vapor and aerosol particulates shooting into the jet stream and evoking utter havoc. Violent 600-foot-high tsunamis radiating out, as well as hurricanes the size of Category 5 Dorian. What about a week of utter darkness ensuing after because of the material that has been expelled into the atmosphere by the comet? This illustration is one scientist's theory of what might have caused the Great Flood. Bruce Mass, an environmental archaeologist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, presumes that this might have been the origin of the Great Flood. More comets and meteors than you could ever imagine. There are hundreds of Great Flood myths throughout a variety of cultures. There are so many, in fact, scientists think that there might be some truth to them. Thus, theories evolve, trying to make sense of the recurring themes. If this one theory of comets and devastation brings about utter terror for you, you are not alone. To me, this description is like an apocalyptic film. A movie with Will Smith, perhaps, or maybe even zombies. The raw truth of aftermath, though, is also what it might be. For instance, the image of Paradise, California after the wildfires last year, or Puerto Rico after the Hurricane Maria in 2017, or currently the Bahamas. This visualization illustrates destruction and annihilation, or as some have said, almost destruction and annihilation. For in these flood myths, creation is not wiped out completely. There is a recreation that takes place. In the ancient Mesopotamian tale, the Epic of Gilgamesh, multiple gods bring forth the flood, and a different God saves humankind. The important distinction made by the Israelites, which separated their account from other myths of the time, was that there was and is only one God. The same God that brought the flood is the same God that brought forth recreation of the world. This depiction of God as a God that changes is unique to some of our inclinations, however. Theologian Walter Brueggemann writes, "Many people hold a view of God as unchanging and indifferent to anything going on in the world. It's as though God were a plastic, fixed entity. But Israel's God is fully person, a person that hurts and celebrates, responds and acts in remarkable freedom. God is as fresh and new in relation to creation as God calls us to be with God. God can change God's mind so that God can abandon what God has made. And God can rescue that which God has condemned." Now, a God that condemns and a God that changes God's mind, How does that fit with our understanding of who the Almighty One is? The scripture reading this morning is situated on the tail end of chaos. The account from Genesis this morning picks up with the water surrounding the ark, and Noah sending out birds in search of. The rain has subsided, and the boat is riding on the ebb and flow of the water. The lapping sound of the water on the side of the ark resembles the sound of a clock ticking. Time just passing by. Noah just waiting. This man of many years waiting in great anticipation of what will come next. He knows that his neighbors are gone. His home is gone. That favorite tree that he sat by and watched the sunset for the last 600 years, gone. What will come next? What will God do next? As we spend time with this story, I find myself asking loads of questions. What can this story teach us? Can we learn something about ourselves? Can we learn something about God? There's a children's book that introduces the idea of truth to children, a way to teach the difference between trolls and fairies, bad guys and heroines, evil and goodness. When children hear stories, it's important for them to learn how to discern what is fact and what is fiction. What is reality? Is there a purpose to fictitious stories, or are they just lies worth dismissing? In this story of Noah and the ark, which is often told as a children's story, what is true? So this book, titled, Is That Story True? It's about a little girl named Maggie and her mother. The two of them have a conversation every night after their bedtime reading. One night they read the story of Oscar Wilde, the story of the selfish giant. Another night they read the story of King Midas. And another night they read the parable of the lost sheep. Maggie asks her mom the same question after each story. Mommy, is this story true? Her mom lovingly responds by saying, what happens when people are selfish and will not share the beautiful things that they have in their lives? What happens when we are greedy and we want more and more? Darling, what happened when you were lost? Maggie makes a realization at the end of the book, and she comments to her mom that maybe some stories are true on the inside, even if they aren't true on the outside. What is true about the story of Noah and the ark? Noah demonstrates incredible patience with his waiting and his faith in what was to come. We can learn that when we endure trauma, heartache, or complete destruction, we too can embody these qualities that Noah possessed. But this story also teaches us something true about God. God can evoke a great flood, and God can bring about complete restoration. Brueggemann goes on to say, this story is not about the world assaulted and a God who stands remote. It is about the hurt God endures because of and for the sake of God's wayward creation. The new creation is wrought with the same costly engagement and waiting as is the first creation. God's role in the story illustrates to humanity God's deep love. For God so loved the world that God brought about a new creation. Before John 3:16, before Christ walked on the earth, we have the love of God demonstrated through the recreation of the world. It is popularly thought that the crisis of the flood is to place the world in jeopardy, but a close reading indicates that it is the heart and person of God which are placed in crisis. The crisis is not the water, which has become only a dramatic setting. Rather, the crisis comes because of the world, which evokes hurt and grief in the heart of God. The text affirms that God is decisively impacted by the suffering, hurt, and circumstance of God's creation. God's decision to change God's mind was not an isolated decision. It is a decision that still affects us. For we are reminded whenever we see the bending of the prism of light, God has placed an exquisite visual reminder of God's covenant with creation, a covenant that has been seen through millennia. The sign of the rainbow is a palpable reminder of God's love for the world. Our ancestors wrote about a God that will never destroy again. George Mendenhall, a biblical scholar, connects the rainbow, often cited as a bow in different biblical translations, to a weapon, more concisely, an undrawn bow. Since God is the victor over the chaos and perhaps also over God's inclination to punish, the promise of God is that God will not again be provoked to use God's weapon. No matter how provocative God's creation becomes, what God does in this story is vow to never use God's weapon against creation ever again. God grieves for creation and demonstrates God's love through redemption and restoration. God's love is echoed through the prophet Hosea. In Hosea chapter 11, verses 8 and 9, it reads, "How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboim? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and no mortal, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath." Though we know that God has vowed to never send a flood again, there are still situations in which we find ourselves in. Moments of apocalyptic magnitude. Moments where all we see is destruction, pain, loss, hopelessness, turmoil, epidemics. It feels as though God's presence is far away. What this story of great new beginnings, what it teaches us in today's context is that it reminds us of God's love for the world. God is always present with us, even when we feel like God could not be farther away. There's a book entitled The Art of Possibility. It's a book that is divided into 12 practices rather than chapters. These practices are enlightening approaches to how one goes about living one's life, revealing possibility in the world. One chapter talks about looking at reality for what it really is. The practice is titled The Way Things Are. It's a distinct refocusing from the muck and mire of the day to an outward radiating focus. Rosamund Zander, one of the authors, describes the practice of the way things are. She says, "Speaking in possibility springs from the appreciation that what we say creates a reality. How we define things sets a framework for life to unfold." Let me read that one more time. Speaking in possibility springs from the appreciation that what we say creates a reality. How we define things sets a framework for life to unfold. She goes on to share an example of Jane Goodall's attitude. At a symposium the author attended, Jane addressed the San Francisco Assembly. Her quiet speaking captivated the room, as it had so many heads of states. We heard about it all: the poaching, the carnage, the degradations of nature, the destruction of the habitat. But nothing stood as a barrier to possibility. Her compassionate gaze encompassed it all, the good and the bad, the painful outrages and the joyous signs of life. The author concludes by saying, being with the way things are calls for an expansion of ourselves. We start from what is, not from what should be. We encompass contradictions, painful feelings, fears, and imaginings. And without fleeing, without blaming or attempting correction, we learn to soar. Friends, like a dove with an olive branch in its beak, soaring over the whole landscape, alighting in a place of openness where the truth readies us for the next step and the sky opens up. We have a choice when we hear this story of the great flood. As we stand there and look out at the horizon, as Noah stood there after waiting for so very long, what is really true? What will God do next? Do we see the rainbow, or do we see the destruction? Or, the third option, do we see the new creation, where there's an acknowledgement of where we have been, the pain around us, and the seamless connection with the love and newness that God has provided and continues to provide? The question is for you. It's for you to ask and for you to live. What is really true? Amen.